Lisa Williams' fingers danced across the piano keys, her music silencing Atlanta's elite gathered in the grand ballroom. When the final notes faded, applause thundered. But Lisa was already thinking of her mother fighting kidney failure at Metro General Hospital. From the shadows, Ryan Harrington observed with cold calculation. His family name needed rehabilitation after his cousin's financial scandal threatened his political ambitions. Lisa's genuine talent that captivated without pretense was exactly what his image required. Later that night, Lisa hurried through the hospital's harsh fluorescent corridors. Her mother lay connected to dialysis machines, once vibrant frame now diminished by illness. "There's my star," Margaret Williams smiled. "Tell me everything." Lisa described the evening, omitting her anxiety. "They actually listened, Mama." "Of course they did," Margaret nodded. "When you play, even angels pause to hear." Lisa swallowed hard. The specialist called. "There's a new treatment, but the cost was impossible on her teaching salary." "Don't worry about me." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Some things are in God's hands." Returning to her apartment, Lisa found an eviction notice on the door. 3 days to vacate. She slid down the doorframe, overwhelmed. From acclaimed pianist to homeless in one evening, the universe had a cruel sense of irony. The knock on her door the next morning revealed Ryan Harrington himself, impeccable in a designer suit. "Miss Williams," he said with practiced charm, "I have a proposition for you." Ryan declined her coffee offer, studying her with interest. "Your performance demonstrated something rare, genuine artistic integrity that connects with an audience." "Thank you," Lisa replied cautiously. "I'll be direct. I've researched you. Top of your class. Declined Juilliard for your mother. Teaching to make ends meet." His eyes moved to the eviction notice. "I'm proposing marriage." Lisa laughed in shock. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I'm entirely serious." Ryan's expression remained unruffled. "I require a wife with public appeal for my political aspirations. You receive financial security, a platform for your music, and medical treatment for your mother. You're treating marriage like a business merger. Isn't that more honest than pretending? Many marriages in my circle are strategic alliances dressed as romance." "Why me?" Lisa asked, suspicious. "Because when you play, people believe in something greater," he answered. "I need voters to feel that way about me." "So this is about politics." "Governor, first with an eye toward national office," Ryan acknowledged. "The Harrington name has recognition, but recent events created image challenges. You would help reshape public perception." "By being window dressing?" Lisa's voice rose. "Your music would become central to our public identity. I would establish a foundation supporting music education in underserved communities. Imagine how many young musicians like yourself could benefit." The manipulation was obvious, but Lisa found herself momentarily disarmed by the vision he painted, opportunities she'd been denied, while securing treatment for her mother. 3 weeks later, the night before their wedding, Lisa sat with her mother in her new private hospital room with state-of-the-art equipment. Margaret had already gained color in her cheeks. "Are you sure about this?" Margaret sensed her daughter's conflict. "Marriage should be more than convenience." "Ryan is thoughtful in his own way," Lisa replied carefully. "The foundation will help so many young musicians. And your doctors say the treatment is working." Margaret reached for her hand. "I didn't raise you to sacrifice your happiness for mine." Lisa escaped to the hospital's recreation room, finding the old, upright piano. In the dimly lit space, her fingers created a composition of complex emotions: fear, resignation, and desperate hope. An elderly patient in a wheelchair listened until the final notes faded. "You play like you're having a conversation with God. Music says what words can't sometimes." Lisa smiled briefly. "And what was that piece saying?" The woman wheeled closer. "I'm getting married tomorrow," Lisa replied. But not for love, I'm thinking. Lisa's fingers traced a minor chord. Is that so obvious? Honey, music doesn't lie even when people do. Your heart's not convinced. The woman patted Lisa's hand. I've been married 63 years, the kind where you still want to kiss them. Good morning even when they're driving you crazy. That's worth waiting for. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of waiting, Lisa whispered. Just remember who you are, the woman said gently. A gilded cage is still a cage. The wedding was a spectacular media event. As they drove to Ryan's coastal mansion afterward, his demeanor transformed completely. The warm smile vanished, replaced by cool efficiency. Let's establish expectations, he said, voice stripped of warmth. This is a partnership of convenience. You'll have everything you need materially, but don't mistake this for a love match. Lisa stared at the ocean visible beyond the car window. She had made a deal with a force equally powerful and indifferent. The realization settled in her stomach like cold stone. She had traded one prison for another, only this one had gilded bars. 3 months into marriage, Lisa moved through the sprawling coastal mansion like a ghost. The staff kept respectful distance, treating her with formal courtesy that never warmed to connection. Only Tom Carter, the weathered groundskeeper, sometimes met her eyes with something approaching recognition. Lisa discovered early that her role had invisible boundaries. Her attempts to redecorate even her personal sitting room were politely redirected. Her schedule was managed by Ryan's efficient assistant Caroline, who delivered his preferences as gentle suggestions that were actually mandates. The most painful restriction concerned her Steinway piano, a wedding gift prominently displayed in the main hall, but accessible only when Ryan entertained guests who expected the cultured wife performance. Otherwise, it remained locked, her music contained like her spirit. One evening, Lisa encountered Tom planting bulbs near her window, despite the gathering dusk. "You don't need to work so late," she said, the simple interaction feeling like water. In the desert, Tom glanced up briefly. "These need to be in before the frost, Mrs. Harrington. Please call me Lisa." His weathered hands stilled momentarily. "That wouldn't be appropriate, ma'am." "Neither is planting bulbs in the dark," she countered with gentle humor. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Some things grow better in shadow than you'd expect." He patted the earth with surprising tenderness. "These will bloom when everything seems dead, reminds us that what's hidden isn't always gone." The cryptic comment lingered with Lisa long after he'd gathered his tools and disappeared into the darkness. That night, a violent thunderstorm swept in from the ocean. The mansion's power failed, security systems temporarily disabled. Lisa found herself alone in darkness that felt more like freedom than fear. Guided by lightning flashes, she made her way to the main hall where her piano waited, its polished surface gleaming with each electric burst. Her fingers found the keys by memory, the music pouring from someplace deep and unguarded. Chopin gave way to her own composition, raw, untamed, filled with months of unspoken longing. She didn't hear Ryan enter until lightning revealed his figure in the doorway. Her hands froze mid-chord, but he didn't speak immediately. He watched her with an expression she'd never seen before, something almost human beneath his perfect facade. "You play differently when you think no one is listening," he observed, approaching slowly. "It's almost like you're two different people." "Perhaps I am," she answered with unexpected honesty. "Perhaps we all wear masks." For a moment, something shifted between them. A flicker of genuine connection, possibility hanging in the air between lightning strikes. "My mother played," he said quietly, "before the accident." Lisa held perfectly still, sensing she was witnessing something rare, a hairline crack in his perfect exterior. What happened to her? The moment shattered as quickly as it formed. Ryan's expression shuttered closed, humanity vanishing. She became inconvenient to my father's ambitions. The lights flickered back on, harsh and revealing. Your morning meeting with the Children's Hospital Board has been moved to accommodate a campaign breakfast. He left her sitting at the piano, the brief connection extinguished. But something had changed. Lisa had glimpsed the wounded boy beneath the controlled man, and with that insight came a dangerous emotion, compassion for the architect of her gilded cage. 2 months later, Lisa knelt over the toilet in her private bathroom, mourning sickness, claiming any dignity she might have preserved. She'd managed to hide it from Ryan, whose separate bedroom and demanding schedule kept him largely absent. Shakily rising, Lisa caught her reflection, pale with shadows beneath her eyes, but with new resolution forming. The child growing inside her wasn't part of her arrangement with Ryan. It was unexpected and completely her own. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt something truly belonged to her. She decided not to tell him immediately. This child, this tiny secret, hope, deserved protection until she could determine how Ryan would react to an unplanned variable in his ordered world. That evening, Lisa overheard a conversation through the heating vent connecting to Ryan's study below, where he spoke with his campaign manager about their 5-year strategy. After the Senate win, we'll evaluate whether Lisa continues to be an asset or becomes a liability, Ryan said coldly. She's been perfect so far, the other man replied. The voters love her. Yes, but politics at that level requires an ideal narrative. If anything changes, we'll need contingencies, like your father had with your mother. A long silence followed, then Ryan's voice chillingly calm. I've learned that personal attachments can't interfere with destiny. Everything and everyone is replaceable. Lisa's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. The child she carried wasn't part of Ryan's perfect narrative. Pregnancy would diminish her value as the elegant wife who complemented his public image. What would he consider a suitable contingency for this development? She began planning her escape, hiding away portions of her allowance and memorizing the security system's patterns. 2 weeks later, Ryan informed her that he'd arranged for a specialist to examine her. You've been unwell. Dr. Brenner will see you tomorrow. He's very discreet. Lisa understood immediately. Someone had reported her morning sickness. The visit would reveal her pregnancy, forcing her hand before she was ready. The next morning, a plumber arrived to fix a leak in her bathroom. When Ryan stepped away to take a call, Lisa seized her opportunity. Please, she whispered, slipping him a note with her mother's hospital contact information. I need help. He monitors everything. Tell her I'll come for her if she can be ready. What Lisa didn't know was that Ryan had installed cameras everywhere, their tiny lenses disguised within light fixtures and smoke detectors. That night, Ryan summoned her to his study. The television screen on the wall displayed the surveillance footage of her interaction with the plumber. Plotting an escape, Lisa. His voice remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. Ryan, I can explain. No need. He circled her slowly. I've provided everything stipulated in our arrangement, yet this is how you repay my generosity, with disloyalty. This isn't about loyalty. It's about basic humanity. You treat me like property, not a person. I treat you exactly as our arrangement specified. You knew what you were agreeing to. No decent human being treats another this way, regardless of any arrangement. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You presume to lecture me on decency. Let me show you the consequences. Ryan gripped her arm, dragging her upstairs to her bathroom. With terrifying calm, he shoved her inside and locked the door from the outside. Perhaps a night of contemplation will improve your perspective. Ryan, she pounded against the door. You can't do this. I believe I just did. His footsteps retreated down the hallway. Rain lashed the coastal mansion, wind howling like a Greek chorus heralding tragedy. Lisa stood in the foyer, clutching the single suitcase Ryan had allowed her to pack, her other possessions to be shipped later, a promise she knew was empty as his heart. "You can't just throw me out," she said, voice steady despite her fear. "We had an agreement you violated with your scheming." Ryan adjusted his cufflinks with meticulous precision, not even looking at her. "Consider yourself fortunate. I'm not pursuing legal action. What deception, wanting to be treated like a human being?" His phone rang. He answered immediately, turning away as if she had already ceased to exist. "Senator." "Yes, I can move our meeting earlier." He walked toward his study without another glance at his wife of 6 months. Lisa stood, paralyzed by the magnitude of her situation. No money beyond what she'd hidden away. No immediate shelter. Her mother still dependent on Ryan's financial support. And carrying a child Ryan knew nothing about. The front door opened behind her. Franklin, the driver, stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Mrs. Harrington, I've been instructed to take you wherever you'd like to go." The rain intensified as Lisa descended the mansion steps, each drop feeling like a small bullet against her skin. No umbrella was offered. She climbed into the back of the black town car, dignity her only remaining possession. "Where to, ma'am?" Franklin asked, unable to meet her eyes. Where indeed? She couldn't endanger her mother by going to the hospital. She had few friends close enough to shelter her against Ryan's inevitable retribution. The train station. She finally decided she'd go to her cousin in Virginia, regroup, figure out next steps. They were halfway down the long, tree-lined driveway when a wave of dizziness washed over Lisa. The stress, morning sickness, and night spent shivering in the bathroom converged into physical rebellion. "Please stop the car," she managed to gasp. Franklin pulled over. Lisa stumbled out, falling to her knees on the gravel as nausea overwhelmed her. Rain plastered her hair to her face, mixing with tears she finally allowed herself to shed. When the retching subsided, weakness followed. She tried to stand but collapsed instead, a sharp pain lancing through her abdomen. "Mrs. Harrington," Franklin called from the car, uncertain whether to help or maintain professional distance. "Go!" She waved him away. "Just go." The last thing she needed was Ryan witnessing her humiliation. Franklin hesitated, then drove away. Duty overcoming humanity. Lisa curled into herself on the wet gravel, one hand protectively covering her stomach as rain soaked through her clothes. The pain intensified, bringing with it a terrible realization. Something was wrong with the baby. She needed help, but pride and desperation had sent away her only witness. Tom Carter was sheltering from the downpour in the garden shed when he spotted a figure crumpled on the driveway. Squinting through the rain, he recognized the pale blue of Lisa's coat, the same coat he'd seen her wearing earlier while being escorted from the house. Tom had spent a lifetime averting his eyes from the Harrington family's cruelties. He'd watched Ryan's father systematically break his mother's spirit decades ago, ending with her accidental fall down the main staircase. He'd maintained his position through silent complicity, justifying his inaction with his need for employment and health care for his ailing sister. But something snapped inside him as he watched Lisa's prone form, rain washing over her like nature's attempt to cleanse human cruelty. The memory of his own daughter surfaced, dead at 19 when he couldn't afford proper medical care, forcing him into service to the wealthy family he secretly despised. "No more," he whispered, dropping his tools and running into the storm. He knelt beside Lisa, gently turning her over. Blood stained her dress, mingling with rain on the gravel. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, recognition and relief washing over her face. "Help me," she whispered. "Please, the baby." Tom gathered her into his arms, her body feather-light. "I've got you," he promised, carrying her toward his truck, then back to the mansion. "I won't fail you too." As they drove away, Tom glanced in his rearview mirror. Ryan stood at an upstairs window, watching expressionlessly, as if observing a minor property disturbance rather than a human emergency. In that moment, Tom's decades of fearful loyalty evaporated, replaced by determination. Whatever came next, he would not abandon this woman to the Harrington legacy of destroyed lives. The county hospital emergency room was chaotic but efficient. Lisa drifted in and out of consciousness as medical staff worked around her, taking vital signs, inserting IVs, performing ultrasounds. "Are you her husband?" a nurse asked Tom, who stood awkwardly in his rain-soaked clothes, hat twisted between his calloused hands. "No, ma'am. Just a friend, the only one she's got right now." The nurse's expression softened at something she recognized in his face. "Well, she needs a friend. Wait here. The doctor will have news soon." An hour later, Dr. Patel emerged, her dark eyes serious but kind. "Ms. Williams is stabilized. The pregnancy is intact, though precarious. The bleeding was threatening, but we've controlled it." Relief flooded through Tom. "Thank God." "However," Dr. Patel continued, "we've discovered she has a congenital heart condition, likely undiagnosed her entire life. The pregnancy is putting significant strain on her heart." What does that mean? It means this pregnancy carries serious risks. With complete bed rest and careful monitoring, she might carry to term, but delivery will be extremely dangerous. Dr. Patel's compassionate eyes met Tom's. "I need to be clear. Continuing this pregnancy could cost her her life." Tom absorbed this information with growing dread. "And if she terminates? Her heart condition would still require treatment, but without the pregnancy, her prognosis would be significantly better." Tom nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Can I see her?" Dr. Patel led him to a small curtained bay where Lisa lay connected to monitors. Her skin was pale against the white sheets, but her eyes were clear and focused when they found Tom's face. "You saved us," she whispered, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. Tom took the chair beside her bed, his weathered face lined with concern. "The doctor told me about your heart. Lisa, this pregnancy—" "I'm keeping my baby," she interrupted with quiet certainty. "But the risks are mine to take." Her voice strengthened with each word. "This child is innocent in all of this. I won't sacrifice one life for another." Tom recognized the resolution in her eyes, the same determination he'd glimpsed in quiet moments at the mansion. This wasn't a decision made in haste or ignorance, but a choice aligned with her deepest values. "I need to ask something important," Lisa continued, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. "Anything," he responded without hesitation. "Don't tell Ryan about the baby." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "If he knew, he'd either force me to terminate to avoid scandal or take my child. Once I'm gone—" Tom nodded slowly, understanding the depth of Ryan's callousness better than most. "Where will you go? You'll need care, medical supervision." "I don't know." The momentary strength faltered as reality set in. "I have a little money saved, but nowhere near enough for what's ahead." Tom's weathered hands twisted his cap, a decision forming. "My sister Mabel has a farmhouse about 2 hours from here. She was a nurse before retiring. It's nothing fancy, but it's peaceful, and far enough from the Harrington reach." Lisa studied him, this quiet man she barely knew offering salvation. "Why would you risk helping me?" Something ancient and grieving passed across Tom's face. 20 years ago, my daughter needed help. She was about your age. I couldn't save her." He met Lisa's gaze directly. "Some mistakes you only get to make once in a lifetime." The farmhouse appeared at the end of a long dirt road, its weathered clapboards and wide porch suggesting stability rather than grandeur. Mabel Carter stood waiting, her tall frame and Tom's sharing the same sturdy construction, though her grey hair was gathered in a practical bun rather than cut short like her brother's. "Welcome to the end of nowhere," she greeted Lisa with unexpected warmth. "Not much to look at, but the air's clean and nobody asks unnecessary questions." The contrast between this reception and the cold formality of the Harrington mansion brought fresh tears to Lisa's eyes. Mabel misinterpreted the reaction, patting Lisa's shoulder gently. "Now, none of that. Stress isn't good for the baby. Tom's and told me your situation, and you're safe here as long as needed." The farmhouse became Lisa's sanctuary through the sweltering summer months. Her bedroom overlooked fields of wildflowers, its simple furnishings a comfort after the museum-like perfection of Ryan's world. Mabel monitored her blood pressure and administered the medications Dr. Patel had prescribed, while Tom managed to work both at the Harrington estate and at the farm, maintaining appearances while secretly supporting Lisa's hiding. Ryan filed a perfunctory missing persons report, more concerned with controlling the narrative than finding his wife. "Emotional fragility," he told police and close associates, shaking his head with practiced concern. "We're hoping she's just taking some time to address her issues." The story satisfied authorities and explained her absence from his campaign. Events. In late July, Lisa's mother arrived at the farmhouse, her medical care transferred to a local clinic through Tom's careful arrangements. The reunion was bittersweet, joy at being together again tinged with Margaret's sorrow at her daughter's circumstances and precarious health. For the first time in months, Lisa played music again, on Mabel's old upright piano, composing new pieces when she felt strong enough to sit at the keyboard. The music reflected her journey, melancholy transitioning to tentative hope, fear transforming into fierce maternal love. She recorded each composition, along with spoken messages, building an audio legacy for the child she might never see grow up. One evening, as summer transitioned to early autumn, Lisa sat on the farmhouse porch, recording a message as twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues. "I may not be with you as you grow," she said, voice steady despite the weight of her words. "But I want you to know that love surrounded you before you even took your first breath." She described the sunset, the chirping crickets, the sensation of cool grass under bare feet, sensory experiences she wanted her child to treasure. Inside the house, her mother listened through the screen door, one hand pressed to her mouth to stifle her sobs. "And if someone ever tells you that your father didn't want you," Lisa continued, "know that's not your burden to carry. Some hearts don't know how to love properly. It doesn't mean you're unlovable." Tom arrived at the garden gate as she spoke, frozen in respectful silence at witnessing such raw emotion. Lisa continued, unaware of her audience, "You're already so loved. By me, by your grandmother, by people you haven't even met yet." As she spoke, a monarch butterfly landed on the porch railing beside her, brilliant orange wings motionless for a perfect moment before fluttering away. Tom watched the scene with a strange tightness in his chest, the butterfly's vibrant life against the backdrop of the serene young woman whose own life hung by increasingly fragile threads. That night, Tom made a decision that would change everything. He would fully resign from the Harrington estate, no more straddling two worlds, no more silent complicity. Whatever financial hardship followed would be worthwhile to be able to face himself in the mirror each morning. Over the following months, Lisa's health declined steadily, despite Mabel's careful nursing. Her heart, strained by the growing pregnancy, struggled to maintain its essential rhythm. She tired easily, required oxygen more frequently, and occasionally experienced frightening episodes of arrhythmia that left her gasping and disoriented. Yet even as her physical strength waned, something in Lisa's spirit seemed to strengthen. She spoke often of the future she imagined for her child, a life filled with music and honesty, with genuine connections and authentic purpose. She wrote letters for important milestones, first day of school, 16th birthday, graduation, and compiled recordings of herself, playing pieces she had composed specifically for the baby growing inside her. "I want my child to know their history," she explained to Tom one evening as he helped her to the porch for fresh air. "Not just the painful parts, but the beautiful ones too. The music that saved me, the people who showed kindness, the moments of wonder in an ordinary life." Tom nodded, understanding her need to leave something of herself behind. "Your child will know you," he promised, "through your music, through your words, and through those of us who loved you." The quiet acknowledgement of what they all feared, but rarely voiced, that Lisa might not survive to raise her child, hung in the air between them, neither denied nor dwelled upon. As autumn deepened toward winter, practical concerns arose. Lisa's pregnancy advanced steadily, the baby growing strong despite the mother's weakening condition. Plans needed to be made, contingencies established. "If something happens to me," Lisa said one evening as Tom and Mabel sat with her in their warm farmhouse kitchen, "I want my child raised away from Ryan's influence. He must never know." Mabel exchanged concerned glances with her brother. "Lisa, honey, that's a mighty big request. He's the father. He has legal rights. He forfeited those rights when he locked me in a bathroom and threw me out in a storm," Lisa replied, a flash of steel beneath her gentle exterior. "My baby deserves better than a father who sees children as political assets or liabilities." Tom hesitated before speaking. "I've been setting aside money. Not much, but enough to get started somewhere new if needed. If it comes to that, I give you my word. Your child will be raised with love, far from Ryan Harrington's reach." The promise hung in the farmhouse kitchen, solemn as any vow ever spoken in cathedral or courtroom. Lisa reached for Tom's hand, her eyes filled with gratitude and tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for valuing what he discarded, for being the kind of man I hope my son or daughter grows to be." That night, as the first snow of winter dusted the farmhouse and surrounding fields, in pristine white, Lisa finished composing her final lullaby, a piece that contained themes from all her previous work, woven together into a musical autobiography for the child who would carry her legacy. The last notes lingered in the quiet house, a testimony to a life that, however abbreviated, had been lived with courage and authenticity. Winter arrived early, harsh and unforgiving. Snow blanketed the farmhouse, transforming the landscape into pristine white that contrasted sharply with Lisa's increasingly precarious health. Confined to bed as her pregnancy advanced, she devoted her energy to recording messages and finishing one final musical composition, a legacy for her child. Tom, having officially resigned from the Harrington estate, divided his time between caring for the farmhouse and taking odd jobs in nearby towns. One final visit to the mansion had yielded a secret collection of Lisa's remaining possessions, along with photos of her prenuptial documents from Ryan's office, potentially valuable. Leverage should it ever be needed. During his visit, he had found Ryan preparing for a gubernatorial campaign announcement. When asked about his troubled wife, Ryan had merely glanced up from selecting cufflinks. "I assume the poor dear is getting the help she needs somewhere. These unfortunate mental health situations are best handled discreetly, don't you think?" His complete lack of concern confirmed everything Tom had come to understand about the man's character. On a bitterly cold December night, with snow piling against the farmhouse windows and temperatures plummeting below zero, Lisa went into premature labor. Roads were impassable, phone lines down from ice storms. Mabel, her nursing experience decades old but still sharp, prepared. for a home birth, while Tom stoked fires to keep the house warm against the penetrating cold. Lisa's labor progressed with alarming speed, her weakened heart struggling with each contraction. Margaret held her daughter's hand, whispering prayers and encouragement as Mabel directed the improvised delivery. Near dawn, as the first hint of light crept above the snow-covered fields, Lisa's son entered the world, tiny but perfect, his lusty cry filling the room with improbable hope. "Ethan," Lisa whispered, naming him as Mabel placed the swaddled infant in her trembling arms. "Ethan Thomas Williams." She looked up at Tom, who hadn't left her side through the ordeal. "Thomas for you, the man who saved us both." Tom, overcome, could only nod wordlessly. Margaret took photos with a Polaroid camera, capturing these precious moments. But everyone in the room felt the shadow hovering. Lisa's pallor, her labored breathing, and the erratic beeping of the heart monitor Mabel had procured told their own story beneath the miraculous one of new life. For one perfect hour, Lisa held her son against her heart, memorizing his features, whispering secrets meant only for him. Then suddenly she gasped, pain contorting her features. "Mom," she called weakly, "take him." Margaret quickly gathered the infant as Lisa's body arched in distress. Mabel moved with urgent efficiency, checking vitals and administering medication. But the monitor's frantic beeping confirmed what they all feared. Lisa's strained heart was failing. In a moment of strange clarity between pain spasms, Lisa beckoned Tom closer. "Promise me," she whispered, "he'll know music and kindness, and that he'll know the truth, not to burden him, but so he understands his own heart better than his father understood his." Tom took her hand and the baby's tiny one, creating a chain of connection. "On my life," he vowed. Lisa smiled, a strange peace settling over her features. "Play my lullaby for him," she requested, "so part of me stays with him." Mabel hurriedly set up the recorder Lisa had filled with music over the months. As the gentle melody filled the room, Lisa's eyes closed for the final time, the monitor flatlined, and snow fell silently outside the window. Beauty and tragedy intertwined as life departed one body and continued in another. Tom stood motionless, still holding Lisa's now lifeless hand as Margaret wept quietly in the corner, cradling her newborn grandson. Mabel moved with quiet efficiency, recording the time of death, gently disconnecting the medical equipment, gathering sheets to cover Lisa's body with dignity. The ancient rituals of death proceeded in the farmhouse, even as the new rituals of life began. The baby requiring feeding, changing, the constant attention that newborns demand, regardless of surrounding circumstances. Grief and joy collided in that small farmhouse bedroom, the circle of life completing itself with brutal efficiency. 3 days later, they buried Lisa in a small country cemetery, miles from any Harrington influence. Tom had personally carved the simple wooden casket, lined with dried wildflowers preserved from the summer meadows. The grave marker bore only her birth name, Lisa Marie Williams, with dates and a simple inscription, "Her melody continues." No announcement was published, no obituary printed. As far as the world was concerned, Lisa Harrington remained a missing woman, perhaps alive in some treatment facility, perhaps not. Only 4 people knew the truth: Tom, Mabel, Margaret, and baby Ethan, who slept peacefully through his mother's funeral, wrapped in the blanket she had knitted during quiet summer evenings on the farmhouse porch. After the simple burial, Tom drove to the Harrington mansion one final time. He found Ryan in his study, reviewing polling data with his campaign team. When Tom requested a private word, Ryan dismissed his staff with obvious irritation. "Make it quick, Carter. We're in the middle of something important." Tom stood stiffly in his only suit, hat in hand. "I'm here to inform you that your wife passed away 3 days ago." Ryan's expression barely changed, A slight widening of the eyes, a momentary stillness, then a swift reassembly of his composed facade. "I see. What happened?" "Heart failure," Tom replied, keeping the information minimal. "She asked not to trouble you with the details." Ryan nodded, reaching for his checkbook. "I assume arrangements are needed, funeral expenses and such." "They've been handled," Tom replied, watching carefully for any sign of genuine grief. There was none. "Well, thank you for informing me personally. I'll have my lawyer draw up the necessary paperwork." Ryan glanced at his watch. "If there's nothing else—" Tom hesitated. The words he'd rehearsed suddenly stuck in his throat. He had planned to tell Ryan about Ethan, to gauge his reaction, to determine whether there was any human feeling beneath the political calculation. But something in Ryan's cold dismissal of Lisa's death, the woman he had married however cynically, convinced Tom that Lisa's final wish was the right one. This man had no business raising her child. "No, sir, nothing else." Tom turned to leave, then paused at the door. "She was a remarkable woman. I thought you should know that." Ryan was already returning to his polling data, the interruption nearly forgotten. "Yes, she had talent. Unfortunate how things turned out. Please close the door on your way out." That evening, Tom returned to the farmhouse where Mabel and Margaret were caring for Ethan. The decision they had discussed theoretically now required immediate action. Ryan Harrington would inevitably file death certificates and claim his status as grieving widower for political advantage. Sooner or later, questions would arise about Lisa's final months, about her pregnancy, about the child born just before her death. "We need to leave," Tom announced. "All of us. Tonight." Within hours, they had packed the essentials into Tom's aging truck, baby supplies, the few mementos of Lisa they possessed, Margaret's medications, and the emergency fund Tom had been accumulating. By midnight, they were on the road heading south, 4 people and 1 small truck carrying the fragile hope of a new beginning, far from the shadow of the Harrington name and power. As they crossed the state line, Ethan awoke, his tiny face scrunching with hunger. Margaret prepared a bottle, while Mabel checked his diaper. Tom drove steadily through the darkness, his jaw set with determination, his mind filled with silent promises to the woman they had buried and the child they had saved. "We'll keep him safe," he whispered to the night. "We'll tell him about his mother. We'll give him a life filled with music and honesty, just as she wanted." Beside him, Margaret cradled her grandson, tears falling silently as she recognized Lisa's features in the small face. "She's with him," she said softly. "In his eyes, in his spirit. She lives on in him." Tom nodded, words failing him as emotion tightened his throat. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead, the uncertain path they had chosen, the new life they would build together, the legacy they would protect with every resource they possessed. Behind them, the night concealed, all traces of their passage, covering their tracks as completely as the snow had covered Lisa's grave. In the coming days, Ryan Harrington would announce his wife's tragic passing, accept condolences with practiced sadness, and use the personal tragedy to humanize his public image. He would never mention a child, because as far as he knew, there had never been one. The secret remained secure, wrapped in love and protected by 4 people who had recognized something precious worth saving. Not just a baby, but the truth of his mother's courage, the authenticity of her choices, the integrity of her final wishes. In this way, Lisa's melody would indeed continue, playing quietly beyond the reach of those who had tried to silence it. The small coastal town of Cedar Cove, North Carolina, offered the anonymity they needed. Tucked away on the less fashionable stretch of coastline, with modest homes and working-class residents, it was the kind of place where newcomers were noticed but not scrutinized, where a small family could blend in without raising questions. Tom found work as a maintenance supervisor at the local marina, his practical skills and quiet reliability quickly earning the owner's trust. Mabel secured a part-time position at the medical clinic, her nursing experience valuable despite her age. Margaret, whose health improved in the milder climate, cared for Ethan during the days, rocking him on the porch of the small rental house they found 3 blocks from the beach. They created a simple cover story, Tom and Mabel as the uncle and aunt of their niece's baby, taken in after a tragic accident claimed both parents. Close enough to the truth to be maintained consistently, vague enough to discourage further questions. In a community where many families had their own histories of hardship and resilience, their situation raised sympathy rather than suspicion. As Ethan grew from infant to toddler, his personality began to emerge, curious, observant, with a smile that transformed his entire face. His first steps were taken in the sandy yard behind their house, his first words spoken on the weathered porch, overlooking the street. To all appearances, he was a normal, happy child, growing up in a loving, if unconventional family. Yet beneath this ordinary surface ran extraordinary currents. From his earliest days, Ethan was surrounded by his mother's presence. Her music played softly as he fell asleep, her photos placed where his eyes could find them, her story told, in age-appropriate fragments that would eventually form a complete picture. Margaret spoke often of her daughter's talent and kindness, ensuring her grandson would know the woman who had given him life. Tom kept his promise with meticulous care, creating a trust fund with his modest savings, adding to it monthly with portions of his paycheck. The money would never approach the Harrington fortune, but it would provide Ethan with educational opportunities and a start in life that honored Lisa's sacrifices. Most importantly, they gave Ethan music, an old upright piano, purchased second-hand and lovingly restored by Tom, took pride of place in their small living room. Margaret, who had been her daughter's first teacher, began showing Ethan simple melodies as soon as his fingers could press. The keys. By age 4, he was picking out tunes by ear, his small face intense with concentration that mirrored his mother's. On Ethan's 5th birthday, Tom took him to the beach at sunrise. The boy, already showing Lisa's musical talent and sensitivity, collected shells in the golden light, his dark curls ruffled by the ocean breeze. "Was my daddy a bad man?" he asked suddenly, the question catching Tom off guard. Tom knelt in the sand, meeting the boy's earnest gaze. "Your father," he began carefully, "is a man who doesn't know how to love properly. That's a sadness in him, not a reflection on you." Ethan considered this with unusual gravity for a child. "Did my mum love him?" Tom's eyes misted, remembering Lisa's compassion even in her final recordings. "Your mother tried to see the good in everyone, but loving someone and staying with them are different choices. She chose you." Ethan nodded, placing a perfect spiral shell in Tom's palm. "I'm glad she chose you too," he said simply. As years passed, they maintained their vigilance. Tom subscribed to newspapers from Ryan's state, monitoring his rising political career from a safe distance. They saw the announcements of his gubernatorial campaign, his eventual victory, his positioning for national office. Each success increased the danger of discovery, yet also decreased the likelihood that Ryan would acknowledge an illegitimate child if one were suddenly revealed. When Margaret's health began to fail in Ethan's 10th year, they faced new challenges. Medical expenses mounted, and Margaret worried increasingly about her grandson's future. "You need to tell him everything before I'm gone," she insisted to Tom one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Ethan practice piano through the window. "He needs to understand who he is and where he comes from, not just the beautiful parts, but the difficult truth as well." Tom nodded, knowing she was right but dreading the conversation. How did one explain to a child that his father had discarded his mother like a broken possession, that his very existence had been kept secret to protect him from a man who viewed people as either assets or liabilities. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep just weeks later, leaving Ethan bereft of the grandmother who had been his most direct connection to his mother. At the small funeral, the boy played one of Lisa's compositions, a piece he had learned from recordings, never having heard it performed live. The music filled the small church with haunting beauty, bringing tears to the eyes of even casual acquaintances. That evening, as Ethan sat quiet and withdrawn at the piano, Tom placed a small wooden box beside him. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this when the time was right. I think that time is now." Inside the box lay Lisa's recordings, her letters, photographs documenting her brief life, and a journal describing her hopes for her unborn child. Ethan's hands trembled as he lifted each item, his eyes wide with the tangible connection to the mother he had known only through stories and music. "There's something else you should know," Tom said gently. "Something we've protected you from, but something you have a right to understand." Over the next hours, Tom shared the complete story. Ryan's calculated marriage to Lisa, his controlling behavior, his cruel expulsion of her when she sought escape, his complete ignorance of Ethan's existence. He showed the boy newspaper clippings, documenting Ryan's political rise, currently serving as his state's governor with rumors of presidential ambitions. "This man, your biological father, is powerful and dangerous," Tom explained. "Your mother's last wish was that you be raised away from his influence, that you be allowed to become your own person, not a pawn in his ambitions." Ethan absorbed this information with the same thoughtful intensity he brought to complex piano pieces. "Does he know about me at all?" he finally asked. "No," Tom assured him. "As far as he knows, your mother died childless. And you've kept me safe all these years, you and Grandma and Aunt Mabel." It wasn't a question but a recognition, spoken with dawning understanding of the sacrifices made on his behalf. "We promised your mother," Tom said simply, "and you were worth every sacrifice." In the years that followed, Ethan's musical talent blossomed into genuine gift. By 16, he was performing in regional competitions, earning recognition that necessitated careful management of publicity. Tom worried about photographs in newspapers, about the resemblance to Ryan that had strengthened as Ethan matured, about the possibility of chance recognition by someone who knew the Harrington family. Yet, alongside music, Ethan developed another passion: law. The story of his mother's treatment had awakened in him a fierce sense of justice, a determination to understand the legal structures that allowed powerful men to discard inconvenient women without consequence. He devoured books on family law, on contracts and coercion, on the intersection of wealth and legal protection. "I want to help people like Mom," he explained to Tom. "People who have no voice against the powerful." At 18, Ethan earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, far enough from Ryan's state to maintain safety, close enough to their home that he could return regularly to visit Tom and Mabel. His double major in music and pre-law raised eyebrows among advisors who suggested he focus on one path, but Ethan remained committed to both passions, seeing them as complementary rather than competitive. "Music speaks to the heart," he explained. When Tom questioned the demanding schedule, "Law speaks to the mind. I need both to honor my mother's legacy." On the day Ethan left for college, Tom gave him one final item, a small key to a safe deposit box. "This contains everything we have of your mother's," he explained. "Her original recordings, her legal documents, the prenuptial agreement with Ryan, photographs of the farmhouse where you were born. I've kept copies, but the originals belong to you now." Ethan studied the key in his palm, the weight of it representing not just metal, but memory, history, identity. "When the time is right," he said quietly. "I want to visit her grave." Tom nodded, understanding that the young man had begun a journey that would inevitably lead him back to his origins, to the truth of his beginning, perhaps eventually to a confrontation with the father who had never known him. "When you're ready," he agreed. "I'll take you there myself." As Ethan drove away toward his future, Tom stood in the yard of the small house that had sheltered their unconventional family for nearly 2 decades. The boy they had protected had become a young man of exceptional promise, thoughtful, talented, with the moral clarity that Lisa had embodied and the quiet strength she had discovered in her final months. Whatever path Ethan chose, whether music or law or some combination unique to his particular gifts, Tom felt certain of one thing: Lisa's melody continued in her son, more powerful and authentic than even she might have imagined possible on that snowy night when she entrusted him to their care with her dying breath. 20 years after Lisa's death, Ethan Thomas Williams stood at the threshold of an impressive career. His dual degrees in music and law had opened doors that most young men his age could only dream about. Concert halls welcomed his performances with enthusiasm, while prestigious law firms courted his analytical mind and ethical reputation. At 22, he balanced these worlds with the same thoughtful intensity he had shown as a child at the piano, fully present in each, drawing connections between art and justice that others might have missed. Yet beneath his accomplishments ran a current of unfinished business, questions that remained unanswered, a story whose final chapters had yet to be written. The key to his mother's safe deposit box weighed in his pocket as he drove the familiar coastal highway toward Cedar Cove, returning home for what would be a pivotal conversation with the man who had raised him. Tom Carter waited on the porch of the small house they had shared for 20 years, his hair now completely white, his tall frame slightly stooped with age, but his eyes still clear and watchful. At 70, he had retired from the marina, focusing his energy on the small woodworking business he had built over the years, crafting furniture and musical instruments that carried the same attention to detail he had brought to raising Ethan. "You've been thinking about him again," Tom observed as they sat together after dinner, the perceptiveness that had always characterized their relationship undiminished by time or distance. Ethan nodded, turning the delicate teacup in his hands, one of the few items that had belonged to his mother, rescued from the Harrington mansion during Tom's final visit. "I've been following his career. He's announcing his presidential campaign next month." The "he" required no clarification between them. Ryan Harrington had risen exactly as he had planned, from state governor to U.S. senator, his ambitions now fixed on the White House. His political persona centered on traditional family values, despite never having remarried after Lisa's death. His bachelor status explained away as devoted widowhood, a man too loyal to his first love to seek another. The irony of this narrative was not lost on either of them. The man who had locked his wife in a bathroom, thrown her out in a storm, and shown no grief at news of her death, now used her memory as a political asset, a humanizing touch to his otherwise calculating image. "I think it's time I visited her grave," Ethan said quietly, "before he becomes any more powerful, before the security and scrutiny make it impossible." Tom studied the young man who had been his life's purpose for 2 decades, recognizing that this decision represented more than a pilgrimage to a mother's final resting place. It was a step toward confronting the other half of his identity, the legacy of a father who had never acknowledged his existence. "Are you sure you're ready?" Tom asked, the question encompassing far more than the emotional toll of visiting a grave. "I'm ready," Ethan confirmed, his voice steady. "Not for confrontation, not yet, but to connect the pieces of who I am. 20 years is long enough to live in hiding, The drive to the small country cemetery took them across 3 state lines, a journey measured not just in miles, but in memories shared between them. Tom recounted stories of the farmhouse, of Lisa's final months, of the birth that had given Ethan life, even as it claimed his mother's. Some tales Ethan had heard before, others were new, details Tom had withheld until he believed the young man could bear the full truth of his beginning. The cemetery, when they finally reached it, was smaller than Ethan had imagined, a peaceful place surrounded by oak trees whose branches created dappled patterns on the modest graves below. Lisa's marker stood near the back, a simple stone bearing only her birth name, dates, and the inscription Tom had chosen 2 decades earlier. Her melody continues. Ethan knelt beside the grave, touching the cool stone with gentle fingers, connecting physically with the mother he had known only through recordings, photographs, and others' memories. Tom stood at a respectful distance, allowing the young man this private moment with the woman who had chosen his life above her own. Neither of them noticed the black SUVs that pulled into the cemetery entrance, nor the distinguished figure who emerged from the lead vehicle, accompanied by suited security personnel. The approaching group was halfway across the grounds before Tom glanced up, recognition and shock freezing him in place. Senator Ryan Harrington had aged well, his hair silvered at the temples but his posture still commanding, his features retaining the handsome symmetry that had served him well in an increasingly media-focused political landscape. He moved with practiced confidence toward a section of the cemetery near Lisa's grave, apparently visiting a family plot as part of his campaign's carefully orchestrated return to his hometown roots. Tom's hand instinctively reached for Ethan's shoulder, a protective gesture 2 decades in the making. "Ethan," he said quietly, urgency in his tone, "we need to go, now." But it was too late. Ryan had noticed them, his security detail already moving to assess potential threats to their principal. More significantly, Ryan's gaze had fixed on the grave marker where Ethan knelt, recognition dawning as he read the name inscribed there. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Ryan staring at Lisa's grave, Ethan rising slowly to his feet. Tom, caught between them in a tableau of past and present colliding. Then Ryan waved off his security team, approaching alone, with an expression of confusion and dawning suspicion. "You knew my wife?" he asked Tom, not immediately placing the aged gardener who had once worked on his estate. "Yes, Senator," Tom replied, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "I knew Lisa Williams very well." Recognition flickered in Ryan's eyes. "Carter, the groundskeeper?" His gaze shifted to Ethan, noting the younger man's height, his bearing, the features that might have seemed familiar had he been looking for such similarities. Ethan stood his ground, meeting the senator's assessing gaze with quiet dignity. All the preparation, all the imagined scenarios for this potential meeting dissolved in the reality of the moment. He had his mother's eyes, her artistic hands, her stillness under pressure. But the set of his jaw, the angle of his cheekbones, these came from the man now standing before him, seeing a ghost he hadn't known existed. "Who are you?" Ryan demanded, politician's instincts sensing a situation, requiring damage control. The question hung in the cemetery air, weighted with 20 years of secrets and silences. Ethan felt Tom's tension beside him, the older man poised to intervene, to protect as he always had. But this moment belonged to Ethan alone, this response his to formulate without guidance or shield. "I'm the son of the woman buried here," he answered simply. "Her husband abandoned her and she died giving birth to me." The words struck Ryan like physical blows, each syllable rearranging his understanding of past and present. His face drained of color as he looked between the grave, the young man standing before it, and the aged gardener whose presence suddenly explained so much. "That's not possible," Ryan managed, though his expression suggested he already knew the truth. "Lisa wasn't pregnant when she left. She was 2 months pregnant when you locked her in a bathroom and threw her out in a rainstorm," Tom corrected, years of contained anger sharpening his usually mild voice. "She chose not to tell you, to protect her child from a man who saw people as either assets or liabilities." Ryan staggered slightly, reaching for the nearest headstone to steady himself. His security detail started forward, but he waved them back again, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face, studying, calculating, recognizing the unmistakable Harrington features now that he knew to look for them. "You're my son," he said, the words, half question, half statement of dawning certainty. "Biologically," Ethan acknowledged, his voice neither warm nor hostile, merely factual. "In every way that matters, I'm the son of the people who raised me with love and truth." The distinction cut through Ryan's political reflexes, bypassing the practiced responses and touching something rarely accessed: genuine emotion. For perhaps the first time since his own childhood, Ryan Harrington found himself without a strategic angle, without a calculated response, without control of the narrative unfolding around him. "Why now?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "After all these years, why reveal yourself now?" "I didn't come here to reveal myself," Ethan replied with quiet dignity. "I came to visit my mother's grave. Our meeting is coincidence, or fate, depending on your perspective." The simplicity of this truth seemed to affect Ryan more deeply than any accusation might have. He looked again at Lisa's grave, then at the son he had never known existed, the living legacy of the woman he had discarded from his carefully constructed life. "We should talk," he said finally, politician's composure reasserting itself. "Privately. There's clearly much to discuss." Tom stepped forward protectively. "Ethan doesn't owe you conversation or explanation, Senator. He's a grown man with his own life, his own accomplishments, none of which required your name or your money." Ryan's gaze shifted between them, calculation visibly warring with genuine shock. "At least tell me your name," he said to Ethan. "Your full name, Ethan Thomas Williams," the young man answered. "I carry my mother's family name and the name of the man who raised me when you didn't know I existed." The pointed response landed precisely as intended. Ryan flinched slightly, then nodded with grudging respect for the implicit rebuke. "Will you at least consider meeting with me? On your terms, at your convenience. There's 22 years to account for. Questions I have, questions you must have as well." Ethan studied his biological father, the man whose ambition had indirectly caused his mother's death, whose genes had contributed to his existence, but whose values had played no role in shaping his character. Part of him wanted to walk away, to return to the life he had built without this man's knowledge or influence. Yet another part recognized that closure required confrontation, that his mother's story deserved completion. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "Not today. Today belongs to my mother." Ryan nodded, understanding the dismissal for what it was. He reached into his pocket, extracted a business card, and extended it toward Ethan. "When you're ready. My private number is on the back." Ethan accepted the card without comment, slipping it into his jacket. No further words were exchanged as Ryan rejoined his waiting security detail, the cemetery visit clearly abandoned in light of this unexpected encounter. As the black SUVs pulled away, Tom placed a steadying hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Ethan watched the vehicles disappear down the country road, emotions too complex for simple classification moving through him like weather systems. "I'm not sure," he answered honestly. "I've imagined that moment for years, but the reality was different." Tom supplied when words failed the younger man. "Yes." Ethan turned back to his mother's grave, the peaceful stone unchanged by the momentous encounter that had just occurred beside it. I saw something in his face I didn't expect. What? Regret, Ethan said softly. Not just political calculation, not just damage control. Actual regret. Tom considered this, weighing it against 20 years of protecting this young man from the father who had never known him. What will you do? Ethan knelt once more beside his mother's grave, placing the small bouquet of wildflowers they had brought, the same varieties that had grown around the farmhouse where he was born, where she had died giving him life. I'll finish what she started, he said quietly, not with anger or vengeance, but with truth. The truth she wanted preserved, the story she wanted told. He looked up at Tom, the man who had kept every promise made to a dying woman 2 decades earlier. Will you help me? One last time? Tom nodded, recognition in his eyes that this phase of their journey together, the protection, the hiding, the careful construction of safety, had reached its conclusion. Whatever came next would be Ethan's choice, Ethan's path to forge. Always, he promised, whatever you need. As they left the cemetery, the clouds parted briefly, allowing sunshine to illuminate Lisa's grave in a pool of golden light. A moment, so perfectly timed it might have been coincidence, or perhaps something more intentional, a mother's blessing on the son now strong enough to carry her truth into the light. The week following the cemetery encounter passed in tense anticipation. Ethan returned to his apartment in the city, ostensibly to prepare for an upcoming piano recital, actually to process the seismic shift in his reality. His biological father, the man whose existence had shaped his life from the shadows, now knew of him. The carefully maintained separation between Ethan Williams and the Harrington legacy had collapsed in a moment of cosmic coincidence. Tom called daily, his concern evident even across telephone lines. Has he contacted you? Beyond the card? No, Ethan assured him, and I haven't reached out either. I'm still processing. The truth was more complex than Ethan could articulate even to Tom. Meeting Ryan had undermined certainties he had built his identity upon. He had expected to feel hatred, or at minimum righteous anger, toward the man who had treated his mother so cruelly. Instead, he had experienced something more unsettling, recognition, not just of physical resemblance, but of certain qualities, the analytical precision, the controlled intensity, the ability to assess situations with emotional detachment. These were traits Ethan had always attributed to his legal training, to the discipline of musical study. Now he faced the possibility that they might also be inherited, aspects of a genetic legacy he had never acknowledged. The realization troubled him deeply. If he shared qualities with Ryan Harrington, did that mean he carried the capacity for the same coldness, the same calculating ambition that had led to his mother's suffering? Or could the same traits, shaped by different values and experiences, serve different ends? Justice rather than power, truth rather than advantage. On the 8th day after the cemetery meeting, as Ethan practiced for his upcoming recital, his phone rang with an unknown number. Instinct told him who it was before. He answered, "This is Ethan Williams, Ethan, Ryan Harrington." The voice carried the same authoritative tone that had commanded political audiences for decades, though something less certain lurked beneath the practiced cadence. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "I'm practicing," Ethan replied neutrally. "Piano. I have a concert next week." "You're a musician." Not a question, but a statement of discovery, like your mother. The simple acknowledgement of Lisa's talent, something Ryan had used as a political asset during their marriage, but rarely recognized as intrinsically valuable, caught Ethan off guard. "Yes, among other things." "I'd like to meet with you," Ryan continued, properly, not a chance encounter in a cemetery with witnesses and security personnel, just a conversation between us. Ethan's fingers moved silently over imaginary piano keys, a habit when thinking through complex problems. Why? What do you hope to achieve? The question seemed to surprise Ryan, accustomed as he was to people accepting his invitations without question. I've just discovered I have a son I never knew existed. Isn't that reason enough? For curiosity, perhaps, Ethan acknowledged, but you built a life and career without me in it. Why complicate things now, especially with your presidential announcement approaching? A long silence followed, suggesting Ethan's direct approach had penetrated Ryan's practiced responses. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar quality, hesitation, because some questions can only be answered in person, because seeing you at her grave awakened something I've spent decades suppressing, because... He paused again, seemingly struggling with unfamiliar emotional territory. Because you're part of me, whether either of us wants that to be true or not. The raw honesty surprised Ethan more than any polished political response could have. This glimpse behind the senator's perfect facade, this moment of genuine human uncertainty, resonated with his own conflicted feelings about their connection. All right, he agreed finally. One conversation, on neutral ground. They arranged to meet at a private room in a small restaurant outside the city, far from political circles and press attention, a place where two men could talk without the weight of public scrutiny complicating an already complex encounter. Ethan arrived early, selecting a seat facing the door, a habit Tom had instilled in him from childhood, part of the vigilance that had protected him for 20 years. When Ryan entered precisely on time, Ethan was struck again by the physical similarities he had not allowed himself to acknowledge fully at the cemetery. The height, the posture, certain expressions that he sometimes caught in his own mirror. Ryan took the opposite chair, studying his son with undisguised intensity. "You have her eyes," he observed quietly. "Her hands too, a pianist's hands, but the rest..." He gestured vaguely, the implication clear. "Genetics are persistent," Ethan acknowledged, "though I hope the resemblance remains purely physical." The subtle barb landed as intended. Ryan's mouth tightened briefly before he nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "Fair enough. I haven't earned the right to claim any positive connection." The simple acknowledgement of his failings, so at odds with the politician's usual refusal to admit error, created an opening between them, a small space where honest conversation might be possible. They ordered food neither would fully eat, the ritual providing structure to an unprecedented interaction. As the waiter departed, Ryan placed a slim folder on the table between them. "I had a DNA test prepared," he explained, "if you're willing. Not because I doubt, the resemblance is obvious, but because medical history matters. The Harrington family has certain genetic predispositions you should be aware of." Ethan appreciated the practical approach, the lack of emotional manipulation in the request. "I'll consider it. But I didn't come here to discuss genetics or medical histories." "Why did you come?" Ryan asked directly. "To understand," Ethan replied with equal directness. "To see for myself what kind of man discards a woman as if she were a defective product, shows no grief when informed of her death, and builds a political career on family values he never practiced himself." The assessment hung between them, neither accusation nor question, but simple statement of purpose. Ryan's face remained composed, though something flickered in his eyes, recognition of judgment from a source uniquely positioned to render it. "The man you're describing is someone I've spent decades becoming," he said finally. "Not someone I'm proud of, seeing him through your eyes, but not entirely who I was with your mother either." "Explain." Ryan leaned back, gaze fixed on something. Beyond the restaurant walls, perhaps the past itself. I married Lisa for calculated reasons, yes. My family name needed rehabilitation. Her authentic talent offered perfect contrast to our artificial world. I never pretended otherwise, even to her. You treated her like property, Ethan countered, the words precise and cutting. I treated her according to the arrangement we both agreed to, Ryan corrected, though without heat. A business partnership, with defined parameters. What I didn't anticipate was how her presence would affect me over time, how her authenticity would highlight the emptiness of everything I had been taught to value. Ethan's skepticism must have shown in his expression, for Ryan continued with increasing intensity, as if compelled to make this point understood. The night of the storm, the night I locked her in that bathroom, I had convinced myself she was being unfaithful. The security footage showed her passing a note to the plumber. In my mind, twisted by my father's paranoia and my own insecurity, it became evidence of betrayal. It was a cry for help, Ethan said quietly. From a woman who felt imprisoned. I know that now, Ryan acknowledged. I didn't allow myself to know it then, when she collapsed on the driveway after I ordered her to leave. He paused, visible discomfort crossing his features. I saw it happen. From the upstairs window. I watched and did nothing. That moment has revisited me more times than I can count over 20 years. The admission stunned Ethan. Tom had described seeing Ryan at the window, but had never suggested the senator had witnessed his own cruelty in action. Why didn't you help her? Ryan's gaze dropped to his untouched food, because acknowledging her distress would have meant acknowledging my responsibility for causing it. Because the narrative I had constructed of her instability, her betrayal, would have collapsed, because I was my father's son, taught that weakness in any form was unforgivable. So you let her die, Ethan said flatly. I didn't know she was pregnant, Ryan countered quickly. I didn't know her heart was failing. I told myself Carter would help her. I saw him carrying her to his truck. I convinced myself she would be fine. That distance from me was what she needed. Convenient absolution. No absolution, Ryan corrected, something raw breaking through his controlled exterior. No peace, no self-forgiveness, just carefully constructed compartmentalization, the politician's specialty. I built a wall between that moment and the rest of my existence. I never looked back until I saw you standing at her grave. The sincerity in Ryan's voice was disorienting. Ethan had prepared for denial, for political spin, for cold dismissal of responsibility. This apparent regret, this unexpected vulnerability from a man known for calculation rather than conscience, disturbed the narrative he had constructed over years of imagined confrontation. What do you want from me now? Ethan asked directly. Recognition? Forgiveness? A convenient photo opportunity for your presidential campaign, the long-lost son offering humanizing depth to your public image? The questions were deliberately provocative, testing the authenticity of Ryan's apparent remorse. The senator flinched visibly at the last suggestion, his expression hardening momentarily before resolving into something more complex. Sadness, mingled with resignation. What I want isn't relevant, he said quietly. I forfeited any right to make demands 20 years ago. This meeting is about what you need. Answers, closure, perhaps justice for your mother. Whatever that looks like, I'm prepared to accept it. The humble response, so at odds with Ryan Harrington's public persona, left Ethan momentarily speechless. He had expected to face his father's power and calculation. Instead, he found himself confronting an aging man, carrying hidden regrets beneath his perfect political facade. I want the truth acknowledged, Ethan said finally, not just privately between us, but publicly. My mother deserves that much. Ryan nodded slowly, the implications clearly registering. Public acknowledgement meant political consequences. Questions. about his past behavior, scrutiny of his treatment of Lisa, potentially his presidential aspirations, derailed before they officially began. And if I do this, acknowledge everything truthfully, whatever the personal cost? Ethan considered the question carefully. Then perhaps we can discover if there's anything worth salvaging between us. Not as senator and citizen, not as Harrington, heir and acknowledged son, but simply as two people connected by a woman who deserved better from both life and love. It wasn't forgiveness. That would require more time, more evidence of genuine transformation. It wasn't rejection either. That would deny the possibility of growth, of redemption that Lisa herself might have recognized as valuable. It was simply the next step in a journey neither had anticipated taking together, a tentative path toward truth, if not reconciliation. As they parted outside the restaurant, Ryan extended his hand, a formal gesture acknowledging the tentative nature of their connection. I'll prepare a statement about your mother, about us. You'll see it before anyone else does. Ethan accepted the handshake briefly. Thank you. For the truth, if nothing else. Driving away, Ethan felt strangely lightened, as if a burden he had carried unknowingly had begun to shift. His mother's story would finally emerge from shadow into light, her experience validated rather than erased. Whatever came next, whether relationship or merely resolution, would build on that foundation of acknowledged truth. He called Tom from the car, the older man waiting anxiously for news of the meeting. How did it go? What did he want? It was, not what I expected, Ethan admitted. He's going to acknowledge everything publicly, about Mom, about me, about what really happened. Tom's shock was audible even through the phone connection. Ryan, Harrington is going to admit wrongdoing? Voluntarily? That doesn't sound like the man I knew. Perhaps he's changed, Ethan suggested. Or perhaps he's simply reached an age where truth matters more than image. Either way, Mom's story will finally be told correctly. The significance of this outcome hung between them. Validation of 20 years of protection, of promises kept to a dying woman, of a life built on honesty rather than privilege or position. Your mother would be proud, Tom said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become. Someone strong enough to seek truth without being consumed by bitterness. That's her legacy in you, Ethan, her true melody continuing. As Ethan drove toward home, toward the practice room where his mother's music waited to be interpreted through his fingers, he felt her presence more tangibly than ever before, not as memory or recording, but as living influence, as values embodied and choices made, as courage facing power without flinching. Whatever connection might develop with Ryan Harrington, this deeper connection remained his true inheritance. Not DNA, but determination. Not genetics, but genuine humanity in the face of life's harshest challenges. The week following the cemetery, encounter passed in tense anticipation. Ethan returned to his apartment, ostensibly to prepare for an upcoming piano recital, actually to process the seismic shift in his reality. His biological father now knew of him. The carefully maintained separation between Ethan Williams and the Harrington legacy had collapsed in a moment of cosmic coincidence. The truth was more complex than Ethan could articulate, even to Tom. Meeting. Ryan had undermined certainties he had built his identity upon. He had expected to feel hatred toward the man who had treated his mother so cruelly. Instead, he had experienced something more unsettling: recognition. Not just physical resemblance, but certain qualities: the analytical precision, the controlled intensity, the ability to assess situations with emotional detachment. On the 8th day after the cemetery meeting, as Ethan practiced for his upcoming recital, his phone rang with an unknown number. "This is Ethan Williams, Ethan Ryan Harrington." The voice carried the same authoritative tone that had commanded political audiences for decades. I'd like to meet with you properly. Not a chance encounter in a cemetery with witnesses and security personnel. Just a conversation between us. Why? What do you hope to achieve? Ethan's fingers moved silently over imaginary piano keys, a habit when thinking through complex problems. I've just discovered I have a son I never knew existed. Isn't that reason enough? For curiosity, perhaps, Ethan acknowledged. But you built a life and career without me in it. Why complicate things now, especially with your presidential announcement? Approaching. A long silence followed. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar quality, hesitation. Because some questions can only be answered in person. Because seeing you at her grave awakened something I've spent decades suppressing. Because you're part of me, whether either of us wants that to be true or not. The raw honesty surprised Ethan. All right, one conversation on neutral ground. They met at a private room in a small restaurant outside the city. Ryan took the opposite chair, studying his son with undisguised intensity. You have her eyes, he observed quietly. Her hands, too, a pianist's hands. But the rest? He gestured vaguely. Genetics are persistent, Ethan acknowledged, though I hope the resemblance remains purely physical. Ryan's mouth tightened briefly before he nodded. Fair enough. I haven't earned the right to claim any positive connection. They ordered food, neither would fully eat. Ryan placed a slim folder on the table between them. I had a DNA test prepared, he explained. If you're willing. Not because I doubt the resemblance is obvious, but because medical history matters. The Harrington family has certain genetic predispositions you should be aware of. I'll consider it. But I didn't come here to discuss genetics or medical histories. Why did you come? Ryan asked directly. To understand, Ethan replied with equal directness. To see for myself what kind of man discards a woman as if she were a defective product, shows no grief when informed of her death, and builds a political career on family values he never practiced himself. Ryan leaned back, gaze fixed on something beyond the restaurant walls. I married Lisa for calculated reasons, yes. My family name needed rehabilitation. Her authentic talent offered perfect contrast to our artificial world. I never pretended. Otherwise, even to her, you treated her like property, Ethan countered, the words precise and cutting. I treated her according to the arrangement we both agreed to, Ryan corrected, though without heat. What I didn't anticipate was how her presence would affect me over time, how her authenticity would highlight the emptiness of everything I had been taught to value. Ryan continued with increasing intensity. The night of the storm. The night I locked her in that bathroom, I had convinced myself she was being unfaithful. The security footage showed her passing a note to the plumber. In my mind, it became evidence of betrayal. It was a cry for help, Ethan said quietly, from a woman who felt imprisoned. I know that now, Ryan acknowledged. I didn't allow myself to know it then, when she collapsed on the driveway after I ordered her to leave. He paused. I saw it happen, from the upstairs window. I watched and did nothing. That moment has revisited me more times than I can count over 20 years. The admission stunned Ethan. Why didn't you help her? Because acknowledging her distress would have meant acknowledging my responsibility for causing it. Because the narrative I had constructed of her instability, her betrayal, would have collapsed, because I was my father's son, taught that weakness in any form was unforgivable. So, you let her die, Ethan said flatly. I didn't know she was pregnant, Ryan countered quickly. I didn't know her heart was failing. I told myself Carter would help her. I saw him carrying her to his truck. Convenient absolution. No absolution, Ryan corrected. Something raw, breaking through his controlled exterior. No peace, no self-forgiveness, just carefully constructed compartmentalization. I built a wall between that moment and the rest of my existence. I never looked back until I saw you standing at her grave. What do you want from me now? Ethan asked directly. Recognition, forgiveness, a convenient photo opportunity for your presidential campaign, the long-lost son offering humanizing depth to your public image. Ryan flinched visibly at the last suggestion. What I want isn't relevant. I forfeited any right to make demands 20 years ago. This meeting is about what you need, answers, closure, perhaps justice for your mother. I want the truth acknowledged, Ethan said finally, not just privately between us, but publicly. My mother deserves that much. Ryan nodded slowly, the implications clearly registering. Public acknowledgement meant political consequences. Questions about his past behavior, scrutiny of his treatment of Lisa, potentially his presidential aspirations derailed. And if I do this, acknowledge everything truthfully, whatever the personal cost? Ethan considered carefully. Then perhaps we can discover if there's anything worth salvaging between us. Not as senator and citizen, not as Harrington heir and acknowledged son, but simply as two people connected by a woman who deserved better from both life and love. It wasn't forgiveness or rejection, but simply the next step in a journey neither had anticipated taking together, a tentative path toward truth, if not reconciliation. As they parted, Ryan extended his hand. I'll prepare a statement about your mother, about us. You'll see it before anyone else does. Ethan accepted the handshake briefly. Thank you. For the truth, if nothing else. Driving away, Ethan felt strangely lightened, as if a burden he had carried unknowingly had begun to shift. His mother's story would finally emerge from shadow into light, her experience validated rather than erased. Whatever came next would build on that foundation of acknowledged truth. He called Tom from the car. How did it go? What did he want? It was not what I expected, Ethan admitted. He's going to acknowledge everything publicly. About Mom, about me, about what really happened. Tom's shock was audible even through the phone. Ryan Harrington is going to admit wrongdoing voluntarily? That doesn't sound like the man I knew. Perhaps he's changed, Ethan suggested. Or perhaps he's simply reached an age where truth matters more than image. Either way, Mom's story will finally be told correctly. Your mother would be proud, Tom said, his voice rough with emotion, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become, someone strong enough to seek truth without being consumed by bitterness. That's her legacy in you, Ethan, her true melody continuing. The political world exploded 1 week later when Senator Ryan Harrington called an unexpected press conference. Standing before a forest of microphones, his usual campaign team conspicuously absent, Ryan began with words that silenced the assembled press corps. 25 years ago, I married a talented pianist named Lisa Williams. 2 years later, she died under circumstances I have never fully or truthfully explained. Today, I'm here to correct that omission and acknowledge a truth I have avoided for over 2 decades. What followed was unprecedented. A sitting senator, presidential hopeful, and powerful political figure voluntarily dismantling his carefully constructed narrative. Ryan spoke without notes, detailing the calculated nature of his marriage to Lisa, his controlling behavior, and his cruel expulsion of her that ultimately led to her death. I presented myself as a grieving widower, while knowing I had contributed directly to the circumstances of her passing, he admitted. I have built a career partly on the foundation of that deception, using traditional family values as a platform, while having failed to demonstrate those values in my own life. The press room remained stunned as Ryan continued his confession. When he reached the most recent revelation, his voice faltered slightly. 1 week ago, I discovered that Lisa was Pregnant when she left our home, she gave birth to a son, my son, shortly before her death from heart failure. That child, now a young man of exceptional character and accomplishment, was raised without my knowledge by people who loved Lisa and honored her final wishes. Questions erupted immediately. Ryan raised his hands for silence before continuing. I will not be announcing a presidential campaign as planned. Instead, I will be completing my current Senate term while establishing a foundation in Lisa Williams' name, dedicated to supporting victims of psychological abuse and coercive control. Beyond that, my focus will be on earning the right to know, the son I never knew existed, if he determines that relationship has value to him. The political aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. Media outlets scrambled to identify the unnamed son, to locate those who had raised him, to piece together the remarkable story of a child hidden in plain sight for over 2 decades. Ethan watched the press conference from his apartment, Tom beside him providing silent support. Though Ryan had consulted him on the statement as promised, seeing it delivered to the world created an emotional impact neither had fully anticipated. 3 weeks after the press conference, as media attention began to shift toward other stories, Ryan reached out again. "I'm resigning my committee positions," he explained during their brief call, "stepping back from public life as much as possible while still fulfilling my term obligations. I'd like to see you again if you're willing." Their second meeting took place at Ethan's apartment. The senator arrived alone, without security or staff, dressed in casual clothes that contrasted sharply with his usual formal appearance. Ryan noticed the grand piano that dominated the apartment's main room. "May I?" At Ethan's nod, Ryan approached, the piano reverently, resting his fingers lightly on its polished surface. Lisa loved her Steinway. She would play when she thought no one was listening. Her real music, not the performances I arranged for political gatherings. "I have recordings," Ethan said quietly, "of her playing, of her voice, messages she left for me before she died." Ryan's composure faltered visibly. I would give anything to hear her again, even her anger, even her disappointment. Without conscious decision, Ethan moved to retrieve his mother's recordings from their careful storage. "This is her final composition," he explained, setting up the old recorder. "She completed it days before I was born, before she died." As Lisa's music filled the apartment, Ryan closed his eyes, his controlled facade crumbling as the notes progressed. Complex, haunting, filled with both sorrow and transcendent hope. When the piece concluded, tears tracked openly down his face. "That was Lisa," he whispered, "her soul in sound. I never deserved to know someone so authentic." "She wanted me to know you," Ethan said suddenly, the realization crystallizing as he spoke. "Not to reconcile with you or forgive you, but to understand you, to complete the circle of my own identity." "How could you know that?" "Because she left messages saying I should understand, that your coldness came from wounds you carried, not innate cruelty, that knowing my father's heart might help me understand my own more fully." Ethan met Ryan's gaze directly. "She had more compassion in her final months than most people develop in a lifetime. I've established the foundation as promised," Ryan said. "The Lisa Williams Foundation for Healing Arts. The paperwork gives you control of its direction and resources, independent of my involvement." He removed a small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal an antique emerald ring surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," Ryan explained. "The only woman in the Harrington family who married for love rather than advantage. I gave it to Lisa when we married, though she rarely wore it. It should be yours now, not as inheritance or attempted reconciliation, but as rightful connection to both sides of your history." "Thank you," Ethan said simply. "Not for the value, but for the recognition." "There's something else I'd like to discuss," Ryan continued. "The foundation needs a performance for its opening benefit. I thought perhaps you might play your mother's music." The request represented more than a single performance. It suggested public acknowledgement of their connection, a step beyond private reconciliation toward shared purpose. Yet it also offered opportunity to elevate Lisa's music, to transform personal tragedy into broader positive impact. "I'll consider it," Ethan said. "The music belongs to her memory, not to either of our ambitions. Its use must honor that." As their meeting concluded, Ethan voiced the question that had lingered beneath their interactions. "Do you regret it? Truly, not just the consequences to your career, but the actual choices you made with her." Ryan considered the question with appropriate gravity. "I regret who I was," he said finally. "The man shaped by my father's coldness, by political calculation, by fear of genuine connection. I regret not recognizing Lisa's worth until it was too late. Most of all, I regret missing 22 years of knowing the son she gave her life to protect." He met Ethan's gaze directly. "Does that answer your question?" "It's a beginning," Ethan acknowledged. "The truth has its own timeline." The Lisa Williams Center for Healing Arts stood on a quiet street in downtown Atlanta, its architecture blending contemporary clean lines with warm, welcoming spaces. Large windows allowed natural light to flood performance areas and therapy rooms alike, creating an environment where art and healing could naturally intertwine. On opening day, a small crowd gathered in the main performance hall, not political supporters or media representatives, but domestic violence survivors, mental health professionals, musicians, and the small circle of people who had protected Lisa's legacy for over 2 decades. Tom Carter sat in the front row, Mabel beside him leaning slightly on her cane, but straight-backed with dignity. At the back of the hall, slightly separated from the other attendees, sat Ryan Harrington. No longer a senator, having resigned his position to focus on the foundation, he maintained a respectful distance, present but not prominent, supporting without dominating. The program began with brief remarks from the center's director, explaining the vision behind the facility, a place where therapeutic support and artistic expression would complement each other, where survivors could reclaim their voices through both conventional counseling and creative exploration. Then, Ethan walked onto the small stage, taking his place at the grand piano. His appearance generated no applause. This was not a traditional concert, but something more sacred, a witnessing rather than a performance. He adjusted the bench slightly, gathered himself with a moment of silence, then looked out at the assembled guests. "My mother, Lisa Williams, composed the piece I'm about to play during the final months of her life," he explained, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the room. "She created it as a legacy for the child she knew she might never raise, a musical autobiography expressing her journey from confinement to freedom, from fear to courage, from isolation to connection. Though she died the day I was born, her music has been my most direct link to her spirit and values." Ethan's gaze moved briefly to Tom, acknowledging the man who had made this connection possible through decades of careful preservation and truthful sharing. Then his eyes found Ryan in the back row, the father who had once denied Lisa's humanity, now participating in its celebration. For 22 years, this music remained private, heard only by those few people who protected both it and me. Today, it enters the world fully, taking its rightful place in the continuity of artistic expression. More importantly, it transforms personal suffering into public purpose, creating something lasting and meaningful from experiences that might otherwise remain hidden in shame or silence. With these simple words, Ethan turned to the piano. His Fingers found the keys, drawing forth the opening notes of Lisa's final composition, gentle at first, tentative explorations that gradually built in complexity and confidence. The music told her story more eloquently than words ever could. The initial confinement expressed through restricted harmonic movement, the awakening awareness conveyed through expanding melodic range, the growing determination captured in rhythmic intensity. As the composition progressed, the audience seemed to breathe together, to feel collectively, to experience shared emotional recognition that transcended individual circumstances. The final section introduced a new theme, simpler, purer, rising above the complex emotional landscape like a bird finding freedom after long captivity. This melody represented Ethan, the child she carried, the hope she invested in his future. When the final chord resolved, silence held the room. No one moved, no one spoke, all present honoring the moment of completion, not just of the music, but of a circle 2 decades in the formation. When Ethan finally stood, the audience rose. With him, not in conventional performance appreciation, but in solemn recognition of what they had just witnessed. As people began to move through the center, Ethan found himself approached by individuals with tear-streaked faces, survivors who recognized their own experiences in his mother's musical journey, therapists who thanked him for creating a new resource for their clients, musicians who appreciated the technical brilliance and emotional authenticity of Lisa's composition. Tom reached him eventually, his weathered face showing the mixed emotions of the day: pride in what Ethan had accomplished, grief for the woman whose vision had finally been realized, satisfaction in knowing that promises made 22 years earlier had been kept completely. "She would be so proud," Tom said simply, his voice rough with emotion, "not just of this place or this performance, but of the man you've become, someone who transforms pain into purpose without being defined by either." Ethan embraced the older man, words inadequate to express his gratitude for 2 decades of protection, guidance, and unwavering love. "We did this together, all of us who carried her truth when others would have buried it." As the gathering continued, Ryan approached, cautiously, respecting the boundaries that still existed between them despite recent progress. "The performance was extraordinary," he said quietly, "beyond anything I could have imagined when we discussed this possibility." Ethan nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. "It was her voice, not mine. I just gave it the space to be heard." "You did more than that," Ryan countered gently. "You completed what she began. You transformed her private courage into public impact. The center will help thousands of women in situations similar to hers, will change patterns that have persisted for generations. Will you continue to support the center's work?" Ethan asked, the question encompassing more than financial commitment. Ryan understood the deeper inquiry. "For the rest of my life," he confirmed. "Not from the front of the room, not as the face of the foundation, but as consistent support for its mission. My remaining years belong to making amends, not to ease my conscience, but to honor the truth I avoided for too long." This commitment, offered without expectation of praise or reconciliation, represented genuine transformation, not the polished political pivot, but the authentic reckoning of a man finally confronting the consequences of his choices. "She would appreciate that," Ethan said simply. The mission mattered more to her than personal vindication. As evening approached, Ethan found himself alone in the performance hall, seated once more at the piano. His fingers moved across the keys without conscious direction, finding not Lisa's composition but his own response to it. A piece he had been crafting privately since their cemetery encounter, a musical conversation across time between mother and son. Where Lisa's work had ended with hope tinged by foreknowledge of separation, Ethan's continuation built upon that foundation with themes of discovery, integration, and purpose found through challenge. His musical vocabulary honored her influence while establishing his own voice. He was so absorbed that he didn't immediately notice the monarch butterfly that had entered through an open window, its brilliant orange wings catching the last light of sunset as it fluttered near the piano. When awareness finally registered, Ethan's hands stilled on the keys, watching as the butterfly circled once, twice, then settled briefly on the music stand before taking flight again and disappearing. The moment felt profoundly meaningful. Nature's brief visitation, connecting this modern facility to the farmhouse porch, where a similar butterfly had paused beside his mother as she recorded messages for her unborn child. As Ethan prepared to leave, he noticed Tom in the doorway, watching with the patient attention that had characterized his guardianship for over 2 decades. "I heard you playing something new," the older man observed. "Something of your own." Ethan nodded, closing the piano with gentle respect. "A response to her final piece, a continuation." "Perhaps. That seems right," Tom said simply. "Her melody continuing through you, not just preserved, but developing into something she could never have created, but would instantly recognize as connected to her own voice." Together, they walked through the center that represented this same principle in physical form. Lisa's experience transformed into resource for others, private suffering converted to public purpose. Outside, twilight had settled over the city. Ryan stood beside his car, waiting respectfully for whatever level of acknowledgement Ethan might choose to offer. Their relationship remained complex, neither fully reconciled nor completely estranged. A work in progress. Ethan approached his biological father. "Thank you for making this possible, for allowing her story to be told completely." Ryan nodded. "The center is her legacy, not mine. My role was simply removing obstacles I once placed in her path. The vision, the purpose, those belong to Lisa. To you, to everyone who kept her truth alive when I tried to bury it." "Will you play again?" Ryan asked. "Your mother's music, your own compositions, they deserve to be heard more widely." "Perhaps," Ethan acknowledged, "but music has always been one part of my life, not its entirety. There's legal work that matters, advocacy that needs voices, systems that require challenge from the inside." Ryan recognized in this response echoes of his own analytical approach, genetic inheritance transformed through different values into service rather than self-advancement. "Whatever path you choose, I hope our connection can continue to develop, not as obligation, but as possibility." "One step at a time," Ethan offered. "Truth first, then trust, then whatever relationship proves authentic for us both." As Ryan departed, Ethan and Tom remained on the center's steps, watching darkness settle over the city that had once been Lisa's prison and now hosted her legacy. "Are you all right?" Tom asked, the question encompassing all the complexities of the day. Ethan considered carefully. "I think so. Not because everything is resolved, but because the truth is finally in the light. Mom's story told completely. Her music heard as she intended. Her experience transformed into something that helps rather than haunts." As they walked together toward the future they had protected for over 20 years, Ethan felt his mother's influence, not as passive inheritance, but as active inspiration. Not weight to carry, but foundation to build upon. Lisa's melody, indeed, continued, not as exact replication, but as thematic development. Her authentic voice finding new expression through the son who carried not just her genetics, but her courage, her creativity, her capacity for turning even the most difficult circumstances into opportunity for meaningful connection.